I still remember when I was 13 years old, this guy, Rick Stark, came up from Colorado, and he had a software ERP called Profit Systems. And my grandfather, my dad, my uncle, and me all went out for dinner. And my grandfather was like, there's no way I'm going to do this, IT stuff or technology. But Rick is flying up to take me out for dinner. Of course, I'll take the meal. So we go to this meal, and we're talking, and I'm watching this live. But Rick, during the meal, saw the waitress, and she was carrying a tray, and he kind of said, "Oh, you must have a bad back, and because of working in the restaurant, you need a mattress, and the best mattress is at Saks Furniture." And essentially, he sold the waitress a mattress on the spot. And my grandfather was like, "I don't know about any of this technology stuff, but if you can outsell me in my own town, I'll trust you with my technology." So essentially, my grandfather mortgaged the store in order to pay for Profit Systems.
On this week's episode of Tank Talks, we welcome Daniel Sachs, co-founder of AppDirect and now co-founder and CEO of LandBase, to share his insights on scaling a unicorn, navigating leadership transitions, and why AI-powered go-to-market strategies will redefine sales and marketing roles in the future. We explore the evolution of SaaS, the rise of agentic AI, and how businesses can leverage machine intelligence to drive exponential growth. Fresh off a $12.5 million seed round announced in September of 2024, LandBase's new GTM1 Omni platform blends agentic AI with human expertise to transform B2B sales and marketing. In this episode, we'll explore Daniel's scaling lessons from AppDirect, his shift to LandBase, and how AI is reshaping growth strategies, plus his advice for founders. Now let's jump into this week's episode with Daniel Sachs from LandBase. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Daniel.
Matt, good to see you again after all these years.
After all these years, meeting you on the trading desk with Mark Mulrooney. Wow, time flies by. But, it's super exciting to have you in the tank today. I would love it if you can give our listeners a quick background on sort of where you grew up, your early journey, and eventually how you got yourself into the startup and tech world.
Amazing. Yeah, grew up in Niagara Falls, Canada, in a family business. My great-great-grandparents started a furniture store in 1908 on Main Street called Saks Furniture. Always grew up kind of being passionate about entrepreneurship and business. Went to McGill and always wanted to start my own business. And, at the time it was like, if you go into investment banking or consulting, you can then get the credibility to raise money and start your own business. So that's how I met you. Was, lucky enough to have Mark Mulrooney as a friend and mentor, brought me on the trading floor. Just as I was graduating, the world blew up with the Great Recession.
Yep.
And it was kind of wild because I had all these opportunities where I was interviewing on Wall Street in September of 2008, just as everything was blowing up. It became very clear that, there'd be very little chance of getting a job on Wall Street. And I visited my friend in San Francisco, and kind of what was crazy is, on one hand, you have this emergence of applications, which at the time didn't even have a term, but it was like what became cloud and SaaS. And I was kind of seeing these amazing tools that could help businesses like my family's, which after 100 years in 2009 went under, along with every other business on Main Street. So the idea was like, on one hand, the future of entrepreneurship looked bleak, and there could have been a world where just these big retailers like a Walmart and take over. On the other hand, there were these emerging companies out of Silicon Valley that looked really hot. And it was kind of cool because the first thing I did in kind of coming to the Valley and learning about SaaS was created a list of the top 100 SaaS tools. And it was hard to find 100 that I thought would be cool. And it was funny because there's about 30,000 like software vendors, all these old school vendors that said that they were cloud or they were SaaS, but they really weren't. You had to be native, which I defined as like certain technical elements, like being on native infrastructure like AWS, or having multi-tenancy, which was the structure that Salesforce kind of pioneered. And essentially this list included like Shopify, Box, Dropbox, Hootsuite, HubSpot, Cloudflare, all these services that at the time were like Series A or below, like in their apartment, met a lot of these guys, like in the early days, like Michelle from Cloudflare, or Harley from Shopify, or Aaron from Box. But ultimately that's now, above $1 trillion market. And founded AppDirect really with the goal of helping businesses find, buy, and manage cloud solutions. If you fast forward, over a decade to today, AppDirect is the largest commerce platform for selling technology. We do about 3 billion in annual tech sales a year, selling services to businesses around the world.
What was the original vision though for AppDirect? Because you obviously were able to get in front of these, app providers, the Harleys at Shopify. But what was the problem that they had that you thought you could solve originally with AppDirect?
Yeah. So this comes and stems from my family business experience, which is that all these traditional businesses around the world don't trust Silicon Valley. And a software purchase is something that evokes emotion. I still remember when I was 13 years old, this guy, Rick Stark, came up from Colorado, and he had a software ERP called Profit Systems. And my grandfather, my dad, my uncle, and me all went out for dinner. And my grandfather was like, there's no way I'm going to do this, IT stuff or technology. But Rick is flying up to take me out for dinner. Of course, I'll take the meal. So we go to this meal, and we're talking, and I'm watching this live. But Rick, during the meal, saw the waitress, and she was carrying a tray. And he kind of said, "Oh, you must have a bad back, and because of working in the restaurant, you need a mattress, and the best mattress is at Saks Furniture." And essentially, he sold the waitress a mattress on the spot. And my grandfather was like, "I don't know about any of this technology stuff, but if you can outsell me in my own town, I'll trust you with my technology." So essentially, my grandfather mortgaged the store in order to pay for Profit Systems.
Okay.
And the insight was that buying software is about trust. So in my mind, there was no way that businesses in Germany or in Japan are going to trust some random startup in Silicon Valley, but they might trust a local trusted software provider. It could be a telecom, a software seller, an IT manager. So essentially, we built this framework that distributed these Silicon Valley startups to businesses around the world. And my whole first few years was traveling around the world, meeting with all these traditional distributors of B2B software and selling these contracts, and then introducing them to players who are emerging, like a Shopify Box, and all these other SaaS tools.
I love that story. It's something that reminds me that we tell our companies at the earliest stages is don't try to sell to your customers that you want to sell to before you understand what your customers' pain points are. So your grandfather's customer was that waitress, and the pain point that she had was she couldn't, service her job because she had a bad back. And that person, that gentleman, figured out what his customer, as in your grandfather's customers' pain points were. And that kind of feels like what AppDirect was also solving for, wasn't it?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
I
always
that.
try to solve it from the, business pain point, or the kind of be empathetic with the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were some of the most unexpected challenges in scaling AppDirect that you look back on today and be like, wow, I'm so happy I experienced that?
So ultimately, we had this vision. We had a lot of conviction in the vision. And our number one metric was gross merchandise value. So it's the aggregate transaction volume of the apps sold across our ecosystem. And from like the earliest months, we said that was our most important metric. It's crazy, but we didn't generate $1 in revenue for like the first 7 years of the business. It was wild. But essentially what happened was we had this idea. We had an angel investor. His name was Eric Boyko, really talented entrepreneur from Montreal. Took Stingray Digital public in the TSX, and he's friends with Mark as well. I think Mark was his banker taking him public. But essentially, Eric was always obsessed with like your first customer. He used to say like, go, your first customer. So the first customer we had was actually Bell Canada. And Eric introduced us to Stefan, who was the president of Bell Canada at the time. And we were, two guys in an apartment in Silicon Valley, but Canadians. And we were just dedicated. We hired this whole team to launch the Bell Business App Store. And we just focused on that one customer. So we had this one customer, angel investment, had the teams kind of grinding for 2 years for this launch. I remember like days leading up to the launch, I slept in the office under the desk. We were supporting our first cohort of applications that had to integrate to our API. And because with Bell, like the requirement is they needed to have 10 apps launched. And the Bell guys were like, look, we're going to have billboards. We're going to have TV. We're going to throw so much traffic to the shit that it's going to break. It was like at the time the Facebook movie had come out, and you press the button and then you watch the users counting. So essentially there's this like buildup where we were in the smelly office, no windows, press the button. We're thinking like users are going to come like crazy. Press the button. Nothing happens the first day. We kind of
crickets.
fall asleep. crickets. Yeah. So the day after, zero. Like a week later, nothing. A month later, I get an email from Harley from Shopify saying, Dan, WTF, my intern's blog has more traffic than the Bell Business App Store.
Way to go, Harley.
Yeah. So like pretty much like you'd think anyone else would be like, we're fucked, we're gonna throw in the towel, you know?
Yeah.
But we kind of had this belief that like the reason why it's not working isn't because it's a bad idea. It's that traditional go to market, like a billboard and a TV thing, just doesn't convert to digital. So we, kind of like circled up and we were like, why isn't this working? And essentially what we realized is that it's hard to build an app store, and we built it. So the biggest mistake we made is we were threaded on one customer. We didn't build any pipeline. So luckily for us, Deutsche Telekom was going to announce, the CEO, Renee Oberman, was going to announce this big app store at the CeBIT conference. So think of like 20, 30, 40,000 people in a city of Hanover. Angela Merkel was going to be on stage announcing this German cloud with CEO Renee Oberman, who was like a legend. And 3 months before the launch, they just couldn't get it to market. So luckily, I get a cold email from Phil Zamani, who was running this app store. And he says like, hey, I saw that what you did for Bell. Can you do this for us in Germany?
Wow.
And literally, we had no money left in the bank. We had no VC momentum. So I had to just go say, YOLO, I'm going to price this fucking high because I have no choice. Payroll. So I'm like, sure, Phil, like, for Bell, like we maybe charge them $100,000 upfront CapEx or whatever. But for Phil, I was like, okay, I'm going to need like $1 million up front and $1 million a year. And, they just like, they went for it. And we delivered. We delivered this thing. I go to CeBIT and I'm on stage with like Renee Oberman and Angela Merkel was there. And we kind of saved their launch. And ultimately, we were able to use the lessons we had from the Bell failure to make DT work. And then we had AT&T reach out, and we had SoftBank reach out, and we had Telstra reach out. So essentially, like within months of tragedy and thinking the whole thing is going under, we had all this momentum. But only because of the failure were we able to identify what it would take to succeed.
Oh, that's such a great story. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, some founders have real constraints that you obviously had with like payroll and no funding, coming in from the market that forced you into this YOLO mindset to just go big, ask for a big number and see what happens because you have nothing to lose. But what other sort of either real or artificial constraints did you put on the business that helped you scale AppDirect to where it became?
So ultimately, I think you see in the movies, like there's a lot of glam to being a founder. You see people on stage doing the fun things. You see the interviews. You see the eccentricity of a founder. You see like the movement of like the user count going up through the roof. My experience, and kind of honestly, as is most of the founders that I speak to, is like 90% of a job is just solving problems that are almost existential threats. One of my friends and kind of mentors is Jim McKelvey. So he was the co-founder of Square, and he wrote a book called The Innovation Stack that talks about how all the greatest companies were like close to these failure moments, and that's what builds resilience. So my view is that business is about jumping from catastrophe to catastrophe. And it's kind of interesting because ultimately, at least traditionally when we were building, no one wanted to talk about the problems. So, it was the dirty secret in Silicon Valley that you'd face Russian hacking or Chinese IP theft or, HR issues. No one would ever talk about these things. Now, today, I think there's a few people, like the first was Ben Horowitz with The Hard Thing About the Hard Things. He essentially talked about the problems. And now I think there's other examples of that. But what I've found, even Elon Musk now talks about it. He's like, you have to be crazy to be a founder because ultimately you have to run at problems. And it's like, I think his line that he quoted someone from was like, it's like eating glass and smiling or something like that. It's just
Yeah, exactly.
So my experience has been you're jumping from existential threat to existential threat, but you still persevere versus like jumping from success milestone to success milestone. So
I love that. That's a really good idea. I mean, you and your co-founder, Nicholas Desmarais, were co-CEOs for years, something you don't often see, but something I'm sure has its advantages and disadvantages. How did that structure work for you guys? And what were some of the biggest advantages of it and maybe challenges that you faced in that structure?
Yeah. So ultimately, what we believed is that our company would only succeed if you had a go-to-market founder that was evangelizing the vision and kind of traveling around the world in the eyes of the customers. And then at the same time, having someone who had deep product acumen kind of driving the team. And we, at the beginning, we both like loved everything. I designed some of the first logo products. Nick did a lot of the go-to-market. Well, we ultimately kind of decided let's divide and conquer. And it worked tremendously well. I mean, ultimately, AppDirect wouldn't have been what it was if it weren't for the relationship between Nick and I, and the trust and that dividing and conquer. We also were able to bring on Andy Sen, who was the our technical co-founder, but ultimately, like, there was maybe one person in the world who could do this. So essentially, Andy fit every dream profile that we would have had. So he was the first product manager on the Salesforce App Exchange. He was an engineer in commerce, like commerce platforms at scale. He understood multi-tenancy, understood marketplaces. So having him and the three of us allowed the company to scale in ways that otherwise wouldn't have worked. So I think like talent first, idea second, and then just persevere. So essentially the co-CEO model worked very well. However, it became apparent over time that it wasn't as efficient as it could be. As we grew, we kind of found that it was slowing things down where the team wouldn't know who to ask for certain things. And, ultimately, I think one of the hardest but both most mature decisions, we had to make is identifying like, look, if we want to go public and if we want to grow, what worked yesterday doesn't work tomorrow. I always knew that I wanted to start something again and learn, from scratch. Nick, I think, always believed in this like multi-generational business and kind of running it. So essentially we started talking, probably 5 years ago about what, the best operational model for the company looked like. Kind of did a multi-year transition plan where I went from, let's say the board knowing that ultimately we'd kind of go to a one CEO model, me then transitioning to a president role, me then transitioning out, but being very supportive. I'm still on the board, still a large shareholder, still really committed to AppDirect, but ultimately was able to kind of transition out to start something new. So I think Dennis Kavelman, who was the CEO of BlackBerry, is also kind of a mentor of mine. He kind of talked about the BlackBerry experience, saying it works till it doesn't. Nicholas's family company and one of my board members and mentors, Paul Desmarais, ran his business as a co-CEO model and then transitioned to the current CEO, one CEO model. So I think there's reasons to do the co-CEO model. I think you have to just think about it from a first principles, but ultimately you have to be aware that it may not be a durable model forever.
That's amazing. I mean, thank you for sharing that. It's not very common, but it sounds like you had a lot of great mentors and advisors to call on and share from their experiences. And then kudos to you and Nick for having that, foresight to have this 5-year transition from co-CEO to, president, and eventually just being a supporter from the sidelines. But obviously, this is what we're here to talk about, which is what led you to start your next startup. So, first off, how much time did you have, I guess, to think about getting started on your next one? And also, when you started AppDirect, very different time. Cloud was all the rage. I mean, now we've got a way different technology powering a lot of different things. How did you land on LandBase, no pun intended, to get going after, spending so much time at AppDirect? What other things did you noodle on?
So my belief of startups is the biggest opportunities when there's a tectonic shift. And essentially in the history of technology, there was, essentially nothing to on-prem to cloud, and now cloud to AI. And me transitioning out of the business happened right around the time that the transformer models were evolving, ChatGPT moment happened. So I kind of did have the foresight to understand that the next big shift is happening. And I could learn my lessons that I applied in SaaS in 2009 to AI in 2024. And on a first principles basis, the biggest difference between 2009 and 2024 is that it was not cool at all to be a startup. So like, it was cool to be investment banking consulting. God, no one knew what a fucking startup was. Like, I remember the first year we were starting AppDirect. I remember I was working from my parents' house because I was servicing Bell. So Nick was with the tech team in San Francisco. I was staying in Canada to go service Bell in Mississauga. And my parents' friends would like come upstairs and be like, "Oh, you're starting this thing. You're really unemployed and couldn't get a job." And I remember once like Nick telling me the story how he's talking to a Wall Street guy, debt restructuring guy, maybe like Rothschild or something like that. I forget. And the guy was really saying like, "Oh, you're a startup, so you couldn't get a job." Like that was the prevailing notion. Whereas today, it's so different. So I think like in 2009 when I was starting, like literally it was hard to find. Like there was Box and there was Dropbox. There was Shopify. There was maybe Wix or Magenta or whatever, and there was Hootsuite and maybe a couple others. But for any one company or category, there was only one or two competitors. Now it's like literally in my broader category of GTM AI,
yeah.
I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands. It's insane. So ultimately what I always think of is like, how do you break it down to first principles? And for me to I'm grateful that I've been very successful, to have done very well. I have the choice this time to work or not. And to me, if I'm going to do it, it's because I want to be passionate, because I want to make a bigger impact than last time. So ultimately, I want to create a category defining company. Whereas like Peter Thiel, who's one of my investors, would say, like last mover advantage. So ultimately, even though there's thousands of companies out there in the GTM AI space, my view is that there's an opportunity to essentially create a last mover advantage if you were to train what now people understand of agentic AI models, but back in the day, like no one knew what that term was. So similar to how I found Andy Sen from the Salesforce App Exchange, and like he was the one guy that could pull it off. Our technical team includes Hua Gao, who was a Stanford PhD in neural networks and co-founded a Sequoia and Lightspeed-backed company called Everstring, which was like the first of its kind of like natural language processing and machine learning for go-to-market. It ultimately got sold to ZoomInfo, and he ran Gen AI at ZoomInfo. But like the combination of Hua and my other co-founder, Emily, who she actually wrote the Harvard Business School case study on AppDirect. So I knew her for like 12 years. She then went to eBay and ran their first AI ML initiative. She was early Carta. So from like the beginning in the product team to $10 billion round. And then she co-founded Oyster, which became a unicorn within like the first 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So her, Hua, and then recently brought on David Hauser, who was early Salesforce engineering leader, then sold the company to Marketo, which became Adobe. So he understands both the sales and marketing part, and then ran global engineering for BigCommerce. So kind of like, kind of these perfect people that create a scarcity of talent that will give us an advantage. So my view when starting a company is, first you want to look at like the scarcity of talent. So who are the best people in the world that can do what you can do? That then creates hopefully a technology and IP moat, which gives you an algorithmic advantage, which then like can create a category defining company. So that's how I approach it.
You brought the Marvel All-Star team obviously together from a talent perspective, but what was the basic breakthrough aha moment for you to say, I want to go in on solving this go-to-market problem? And then maybe share a little bit about how your GTM1 Omni really is the differentiator for getting into this AI-driven SaaS and sales marketing solution space.
Yeah. So ultimately, the biggest pain point any business has is generating predictable pipeline or generating leads that convert. And it's always been, right? It's like, if you don't have customers coming through or prospects, you're going to have to shut down. And so my family's furniture store, if people don't walk through the door, you don't have a business. And what I found is that over the decade of SaaS, the sophistication required to execute pipeline development with digital channels and offline channels, it became like a far higher bar. So what happened is you ended up having dozens of data sources that you need to harness in order to be really good at lead gen.
For example, like what? ZoomInfo, like things like that?
So it started with like old school. If you go back to it, you could watch like the Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross, or whatever, Boiler Room, and
direct
it was
mail.
Like, you get like a lead list. Actually, so this is the RBC thing. I think that summer that Mark brought me on the trading floor where you were there, I was interning with a wealth manager called Ami Shore, and he literally was like, your job is to go find rich people. And he gave me the fucking phone book and said,
the yellow pages. Yeah.
Exactly. It was white pages. Go call people in rich zip codes. And that was it. And I had to like dial manually. But honestly, it's not that different, right? You need to figure out, okay, who's the target prospect? And then how do you reach them? and how do you convert them? It's like, it's really that simple. But the reality is, okay, what's required today is like a ton of data and signals. So, back in the day, you could cold call someone, they pick up maybe. Today, like, they're inundated with cold calls, so they're not going to trust you. So essentially what you need is to understand your buyer and when they are ready to buy. So when it comes to data, there's like firmographic data, which would be the equivalent of like the understanding, the industry, the company, the location. There's contact data, which is like getting their phone or email. But then there's things like intent data. So how do you understand if they're likely to buy? There's triggers like, did they raise a funding round, or did they change jobs, or did they post something on LinkedIn that could give an indication that something's interesting? So there's all these different data sources that are pretty unstructured and hard for humans to process, but machines can really process that. Then there's like all these tool sets. So I'll call it like campaigns and messaging, which is things like if you're going to dial, there's Nooks or Orem for auto dialer. If you're going to email, there's Instantly or Lemlist, or there's what is it like? If you're bigger, Outreach or SalesLoft. And if you're doing LinkedIn, it's Tripify, or there's others. So there's all these tool sets that you need. Then you also need to be really good at the operations and IT of it, because right now, like, deliverability spam is such an issue. So essentially there's all that. Then you have a ton of siloed teams that are really doing all these manual repetitive processes. So my premise was that with agentic AI, not generative AI that takes that essentially understands natural language, but agentic AI that takes action based on data, we could build an all-in-one solution that orchestrates and executes all these campaigns. So what you can do is harness machine intelligence with top human performance to be able to execute these campaigns. And what we did is train the first agentic model for go-to-market. So people now are familiar with generative AI and language models that understand natural language in order to chat and kind of harness the world's information. What we found, though, is that language models really are not good at understanding the context of why someone would buy. You need private data for that. So we've trained our models on all this different types of data. So the intent data, the firmographic data, the buyer data. But our secret sauce is also campaign data on real campaigns, so we can understand why certain messages convert and others that don't. So this kind of model is like a brain that executes like a whole team that can essentially do all this stuff for you. So my big belief with agentic AI is that you no longer have to work for your software, but your software works for you. So you essentially can reclaim your day and become more human and do the things that you love instead of just sitting in front of a software tool. So over the last few years, we're used to prompting our AI. In my view, our AI should prompt you. So when you interact with LandBase, it's going to automatically understand who you are, who your target buyer is, recommend strategies to go to them. So you just have to approve or decline an idea, or you can edit it. And our machines are going to kind of just get smarter and smarter over time.
So how much of it is in third-party data, that intent data, that context there, and mixed with the internal data that's sitting in their CRM for the existing customers that they've had for a while in their pipeline?
You need it all. So the more you can feed our models, the more accurate we'll get. So our models can do a lot of predictive work, but if we can ingest your CRM data, we would know, what campaigns have worked, what hasn't. If we can ingest your campaign data, that will make it even smarter. There's also the element of like short-term and long-term memory. So we build systems and it's called like RAG and other kind of tools to be able to not just ingest your info, but mix it with our info in a secure way to be able to use machine intelligence to be able to predict and execute these outcomes.
Yeah, it makes sense. So like what kind of businesses are best suited to leverage LandBase? Like what's your ICP? Is it large, companies that are like public companies with 30,000 leads in pipeline, or small ones that only have like 3,000?
Just like you highlighted with the insight of, how from like that furniture store sales, customers. So ultimately what I looked at is what are most people doing for lead gen? And ultimately you find that it's either old school teams that are still doing shit manually, or it's people outsourcing. And people don't know this, but like a lot of people are still outsourcing these leads to just service firms in their industry. So if you're insurance, you just say you're going to buy leads from an insurance platform, or You're going to go to a call center. So essentially, like in the tech communities that we live in or the venture communities, everyone thinks that you need this modern stack and you have, Clay on top of Lemlist on top of this, and you swap out all these people. But like, honestly, there's only, I think that's 5% of the market. So what's interesting is you look at the sales tech tool market, both AI and like traditional things like ZoomInfo and Apollo and all these tools. That's maybe an $8 billion market. The outsourced lead gen market is even bigger, and people just don't know about it or talk about it in the VC sphere.
Give us some numbers around what you've learned during your time at AppDirect for the outsourced sales market. Like, how big is it, and where do you see like the biggest sort of like players?
Well, look, if you think about GDP, the tech GDP is maybe 1/5 or 1/7 of what the services GDP is. So if in 2009, if you were creating a cloud company, by sheer nature of being on-prem, or sorry, being on cloud, you could access an untapped market and you could have an advantage. Right now, there's so many good tech companies that in my view, if you're starting a startup, you shouldn't compete for the tech spend. You should compete for the human spend. And that's what AI
Agreed.
unlocks.
Yeah.
So when I think about the market,
The services.
Exactly. I'm going after services. And ultimately, like, I think I always, again, go to your customers, go to where the pain is. If you want to make things better for the world, you always want to think about like what's going to drive GDP per capita. So my view is a lot of jobs are going to be displaced, but I don't think it's that like an AI SDR is going to replace all SDRs and it's just going to be robotic. I think that what's going to happen is you can harness machine intelligence to do far more, and humans are going to do things that are more differentiating, and it's going to make us like a better world. So if you think about it, like the last decade of us being glued to our screens and social media and all that, it's created us hunched over, mental health issues, all this stuff. Like what I think we'll go back to is the differentiator is going to be someone who's going to take someone out for dinner or out to golf or really understand the pain points. So
you're saying AI will help us get back to the steak and handshake kind of sales model, but taking all the middle work that we had to do to like input data into a CRM and like update all the reports and stuff for, TPA reports.
Yeah, absolutely. Like all the
That's hilarious.
That's my bet, is that all the manual repetitive processes across fragmented software stacks and siloed teams where you kind of have to live in your software, that's going to go away. And what's going to happen is the companies that kind of adopt AI and agentic AI are going to free up their time. Like 80%, 70 to 80% of their time is going to be freed up. And the question is, like, our whole brand statement is reclaim your day. So the question is the reclaim your day that people work less, like, they work a lot less, or is it that they repurpose that time to do higher value things? And I think ultimately it's up to the culture of a company or an individual. You look at like JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon's statements, right? He was an investor in LandBase, but like if you heard his rant, he wants to create 5 to more days a week in-person culture. And I think it's clear that JP Morgan will reclaim the hours by productivity within JP Morgan. And I think that will give them far more efficiency, and they're going to continue to grow. Other companies or individuals could choose to, spend time with family or work less. And I think that's fine too. So it's really up to individuals to decide, what they're going to do with this excess time.
That's interesting. It kind of goes back to your original reason for starting AppDirect. You mentioned about building the trust factor between these applications and the end customers. Maybe a LandBase ends up becoming, doing all the grunt work, but we go back to building experiences and trust events, essentially, for salespeople to their customers that takes up a majority of their time. And we should all be investing in golf courses and ski clubs then, I guess.
You got it. So the key that I learned from that moment with Rick Stark at the restaurant with the mattress is that people buy from people they trust. And that existed with AppDirect, and it's even more relevant here. So we actually, with GTM1 Omni, we have trained our model on like 175 million contacts, 40 million campaigns. What we found is that 45% of campaigns failed to generate leads that convert. And it's not for reasons that you think. Most people would be like, I hired an SDR, they were shit, I fired them. I hired a lead gen agency, they generated a lot of dumb leads, fired them. I got Clay, it was too complicated and it was shit, it didn't work, I got rid of it. That's what you hear when you talk to people. The reality is that it's all about digital trust. And digital trust is a factor of the individual sender and the company. So if you're a startup and you are unknown and you're an individual that, let's say, doesn't have a LinkedIn profile, you're pretty much screwed. You have no digital trust. If, let's say, you're an SDR at a company like Salesforce or Hopper or whatever, like that's better known, they might trust the company, but they're not really going to trust you unless you're a thought leader. So ultimately, what we found is that the trust is going to come from the thought leadership and credibility of the individual that's able to be found and detected online. So that could be like press, LinkedIn, a lot of people talking about them, analyst reviews. Same with the business brand. So if you want to be successful in 2025, you can't be hidden or offline. You have to be a thought leader in whatever role you are across the business. And it goes back to the old school thing. It's all about trust.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, early on when you announced your fundraising round, you said you had 7x higher conversion rate compared to traditional OpenAI models using your outbound lead generation tools, and a 70% reduction in average time spent generated per lead. Obviously, shorter time spent on developing campaigns, from weeks just to hours. Are there any other, tangible metrics that you can share with us in terms of like the ROI people are seeing with your, product today?
I mean, I think those are pretty good metrics, but yeah,
Those are.
what we found is that like AI SDRs produce, really poor performance. Average human SDRs produce poor performance. Top humans produce amazing performance. The only thing I've seen that can turbocharge human performance is if you have a complicated stack orchestrated by Clay, which requires a GTM engineer, but you can uplift performance if you do that. Our models are the only thing I've seen that can take it, from 2x to 4 to 7x. The reason why we say the 7x is because our reward model can create multiple versions of a campaign, and we actually simulate the response. So essentially, if we create the first version, imagine our first version is just as good as an AI SDR message, which could be really bad. And we then simulate it using kind of a technique in AI where we understand the persona of the buyer, both the company and the individual, and we understand how they'll perceive you. And essentially we have two different protagonist, antagonist AI that says like, here's why I would not accept this message. And then our models say how to improve it. So essentially we do this simulation where we create multiple versions. Every time we improve it, we will not send a message that isn't good and doesn't hit a threshold. So essentially what we're doing for you is dramatically reducing spam, increasing relevance that improves deliverability, that improves conversion, that builds trust. So that's how we quantify that 4 to 7x. And then in terms of like ROI, literally you would need, in order to orchestrate something like this, dozens of data, which could cost like anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions, dozens of tools, which could cost anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions. And then you also need a team of at least 7 to hundreds of people. So essentially the total cost of ownership of like a 70% reduction is dramatic. So this isn't like a 2x improvement or even 10x improvement. It's like a 100x improvement. That being said, just being transparent of where we are with any tech shift, like at AppDirect, where I said our number one metric was GMV and it took 7 years to prove, you're only as good, your technology is only as good as human adoption. So LandBase has to build trust in our AI recommendations to our customers. So one of the things that we've learned, and maybe this is advice for anyone who's building an agentic AI, is that people won't trust your recommendations unless you can show them the train of thought of how you came up with the answer, as well as the sourcing. So it actually is pretty easy for us to serve up an answer that our machines think is good, but it doesn't mean that the human will accept it. So what we found over the last year is that we could serve up a good answer. Humans will override it and think it's shit. ends up being really bad. Like a co-pilot model to me is actually pretty piss poor. It helps the human maybe kind of generate content, but like it's not harnessing machine intelligence with human performance to drive better outcomes. So what we've had to do is innovate dramatically on the interface. And actually what I've found is really funny, and it's hard to condition people, but the ultimate interface in my view is kind of like social media dating, where you swipe left or swipe left, where the AI will serve up a lot of recommendations. And honestly, the AI is going to get it wrong most of the time. But if the human likes the answer, it swipes and says yes. And then the AI can learn, okay, this is what your personal preference is. And this is how I can leverage the machine intelligence to get something that's going to be really good. So what we found is that if we served up an answer, humans are going to expect it to be right, or they're going to say, this AI is dumb, this AI is hallucinating, this AI is wrong. But what we have done in our interfaces is tried to educate our users, hey, it's okay that our answers are shit. Just decline it, and then we're going to learn. So there's all these things that I think are, it's kind of this special moment where it's going to be like for AppDirect, it was like a 7-year period where we could learn. I think things are moving so fast that it would be like a 2 to 3 year period. But in my view, like all the value in every agentic AI category is going to accrue to a winner that has a data moat. And that's going to happen in the next year or two. So if I were an investor, I would be disproportionately putting capital, which is happening, into category leaders. The industries that you're seeing where this is happening are true agentic AI players. So the code gen players like a Cursor, Bolt.new, or Devin and Cognition, like that's a category last year that just exploded. The other application layer one that I think is really interesting is support, which is like Decagon and Sierra. That's a really good use case. I think this next year is going to be the frontier of specialized models for verticals. So let's say like healthcare specific or bio specific models, or things like sales, marketing, legal, accounting, and other functions. But my guess is that if there's 1,000 companies that are prompting LLMs in each category, they're great bootstrap companies and they're going to be helpful, but they won't create outsized
Yeah.
returns. Outsized returns are going to go to someone who has a data moat.
Yeah, I mean, total sense. I think that absolutely sounds like you guys are taking on a lot of the workload. Hopefully you have a nice wedge in there to build trust initially before the humans just push back completely, obviously, because you need them to adopt some form of it in order to see those early proof points and ROI. But I want to switch gears here. You've obviously announced that you came out of stealth. I'd love to hear how everything kind of came together. You announced a $12.5 million seed round. Typically, seed rounds are a lot less than that, but obviously given the team you've put together and the background on everyone, it makes sense why you guys rate a little bit more. Obviously, Kevin Hartz led the round with 8VC and First Minute Capital, as well as old investors from your last company, AppDirect, including Inovia, and then Picus and General Catalyst. So tell me how this all came together. How do you decide who to work with? You mentioned Jamie Dimon. I know JP Morgan invested in your Series Z round, I believe, in AppDirect. So tell me how you decided who to work with on this time around.
Ultimately, things happened really fast, and I felt very loyal to my investor base who had essentially made me. If you've heard a theme, like I feel very grateful for my mentors, and so I wanted to bring my last cap table along. At the same time, I wanted some new blood in the ecosystem. So finding Kevin was someone who I didn't know, but he was a prolific angel investor, really trusted. So he came in and led. It's ironic, but all the other investors were either at my wedding or my engagement. So years, really personal. So that was the way the round came together. Happened really fast. I think I couldn't be happier, with how the round came together. But ultimately, I think building a business in this era, capital is one thing, but it's ultimately about having strong conviction in your vision, having the talent that can pull it off, and then really just executing. And the bar for execution is higher than ever. So I think what I think about day in and day out is how do we live up to our investors' expectations. So my view is if you're taking VC capital, you've got to return the fund or more. So that means they are wanting me to take risk. So it's kind of interesting, but I think if you take investor capital, it's your fiduciary duty to push risk so much that you're at the brink of failure. So it's very uncomfortable, and I'm pushing the team because in my mind, I'm not happy unless I gun for the trillion or $100 billion outcome. And, look, if it doesn't work and I end up with 10 billion, I'm not going to complain, but I'm not in this to create a unicorn.
You're not in it because you've obviously done it and you've seen how hard it was to get there, but like you've obviously got some fire in your belly. I don't know if it's from the furniture store background that you had watching your grandparents and family business obviously survive and then not be able to continue existing, that continues to push you forward. But what other kind of big personal challenges have you faced as a leader that you overcome that continues to make you want to run and into that glass and eat it?
ultimately, I've just had a huge conviction and mission for helping business owners. I just saw how proud my family was with their identity of being the kind of people who had that store. And then you go to, Walmart and meet a greeter and they just don't seem to be as happy. So ultimately, I believe that entrepreneurs are happier, and you can be an entrepreneur within a company, but it's an ethos. So my view with AppDirect was, how do we create, millions of entrepreneurs? I think with AppDirect, ultimately, we underperformed our expectations. I think ultimately we're going to be huge. Nick is crushing it, and the business is going to be amazing. But I thought that we could power the majority of software transactions. And we're a very successful company, but I think we could, we still have the potential to be 10x that. I think one who just nailed it was Harley and Toby at Shopify, where they literally created millions of entrepreneurs that would have otherwise been the main street businesses that failed. So I'm super proud of anyone who's, creating platforms that help people be in business. If you look at like Toast with restaurants or Shopify with retail, I'm just so inspired. AppDirect's doing that with technology sellers, and I think we're just like the best is yet to come. But in my mind, the lifeblood of any business is pipeline, and if we can solve that, we're doing a big part in kind of spurring an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think honestly, I have a chip on my shoulder. I just want to create a big impact. The other thing that I think like people are sometimes shy about in the Valley is like, fuck, I also like to enjoy my life, and I have philanthropic ambitions. One thing, like, just to be, I normally don't talk about this, but I guess Matt, we've known each other, so I'm going to throw us out there. Like, one of the hardest things I did is I bought my dream home, like baller house in on the hills of Beverly Hills, and it leaked and like in the news, and I felt so gutted just because I don't define myself as like flashy house, flashy cars. But so I go achieve this dream of like being in my dream home, and I just felt so shitty that the world judged me for it. And then you know what, my wife turned 40. She loved race cars. She, like from a kid, she just loved cars, and I don't. But bought her a Ferrari, and like, so these things are like.
That's awesome that your wife loves race cars. It's usually the husband that loves race cars. That's
Oh,
amazing.
listen, she okay. So this is a funny story, but one of my mentors, John McBain, he gifted us his Ferrari for our honeymoon, and I didn't even know my wife. Like, we never drove. We lived in San Francisco, but essentially, he's like, I'm gonna send my car, and I'm gonna get you like a hotel, and we had a short period of time to pick, so we had pre-booked our honeymoon in Greece. But John's like, I'll send you anywhere else. So we were like, oh yeah, we were choosing between Greece and Amalfi. So we show up after Greece, the Amalfi Coast. We go to this hotel, and they're like, Mr. Sachs, welcome. And they're treating us like royalty. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe John told them that we got engaged, but it's actually like, he's like, no one's ever brought a Ferrari to Amalfi. You have to be crazy. I'm like, it's Italy. Everyone drives. He's like, no, Amalfi, you're guaranteed to crash. So I'm like, fuck,
Oh
babe,
my
like,
God.
I'm not screwing up his car. Like, we can just tell John we drove it. I'm all good. And my wife's like, no, I got this. And she like presses some buttons. The thing goes down. She's wearing this red dress, and we drive around Sorrento in the first day. And essentially, that night we go to the restaurant, and like the host and everyone in the restaurant goes silent. And they're like, the host literally is like, we saw you, both valeting in and like whatever. They're like, A, I've never seen this Ferrari in Amalfi, and B, I've never seen a woman drive a car with a man.
Exactly. Your wife just turned it into like Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, exactly.
In the driver's seat, you're like, who did I just get engaged to?
Yeah. But the lesson, I think, ultimately is that, we all kind of dream of these milestones, but that shit doesn't make you happy. Like, I'm glad I could do it, but like, it's the memories that matter. So I feel like owning the house didn't mean anything. It honestly gutted me, but the memories there were really important. Owning a car, nothing to me, but the memories of that are really important. And then ultimately just the memories of like these stories with AppDirect and the people and, the business that you're helping and all that. So to me, like, my big hardship was getting over the fact that, it's, I know this is, I'm maybe stealing the fast track advice, but like, it's all about the journey, not the destination. And it's not about the asset, but it's about the experience. And that's been kind of my biggest lesson and the hardest thing I've had to work through.
That's an incredible, obviously, advice for founders, obviously, who feel like they're riding on such a high and then they got brought down right away. It's like, enjoy the journey, live through the experiences, whether good or bad, and bank those, because those are things you're going to remember for a while. I guess, just last question before we jump into the fast favorites. What other piece of advice would you give founders today that you'd wish you'd known earlier in your journey? Now that obviously going through like the amazing run with AppDirect and then starting again at the beginning now with LandBase.
The thing that I've learned from many mentors is ultimately the best leaders always seek to learn and always seek to take feedback and be empathetic with customers. But ultimately, they have conviction in their vision. So I think what makes insane entrepreneurs insanely great is that they have like an insane vision, and no matter what, they're convicted to kind of achieve that. But they're also willing to listen and learn. So ultimately, what I advise any entrepreneur is to have conviction in your vision. Ultimately, you need a vision, and then really like kind of seek to learn and put yourself in the shoes of your customer's customer.
I don't think there was anyone who had more conviction in the vision with AppDirect than you at the time you YOLO'd the entire business into DT with no money left in the bank. So that makes perfect sense why you said that. Jumping into our fast favorites. So first off, your favorite podcast.
Acquired.
Oh, I love that. Which one is your favorite recently or ones you've listened to in the past? My favorite's still the Costco one.
Oh, I love the LVMH one.
Oh, that one's fantastic. Next is your favorite newsletter or blog.
Right now, really product obsessed. So Lenny's newsletter.
Perfect. Next is your favorite tech gadget.
Ironically, AirPods. I can't go anywhere without them.
I know. I actually just had my ears tested to make sure I wasn't listening to them too much, and so far I passed the test. Maybe not for that long.
You gotta control your ear.
Agreed. Next is your favorite new trend. I have a feeling 100%. I know what you're going to say.
100% agentic AI. It's going to change the world.
Yeah. Is there any other agentic AI things that you're liking out there besides what you're doing at LandBase personally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just like I said, there were 30,000 ISVs, but only 100 true AI native ones. I think like there's right now, like the only true agentic AI kind of categories that I've seen would be like the cogen companies. So Bolt.new, the support companies like a Decagon or Sierra. And then I think we'll be like the next. I think there's going to be a Cambrian explosion, over the next
We agree.
couple of years.
We have an investment in a company called Pika OS. That's exactly building the infrastructure back end for agentic AI for you to plug in any of your, third-party enterprise applications, but prompt it for an agentic AI tool that does all the work for you. So we believe in that as well. Next is your favorite book.
Recent book. So I mentioned The Hard Thing About Hard Things being one of the first where you can kind of empathize. Another one that was before that was Founders at Work by Jessica Livingston. That also told stories of entrepreneurs. The most recent version of this, which tells stories about the hardship, is Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution by Uri Levine. He was the founder of Waze, and he just emphasizes this notion of like entrepreneurship is throwing yourself at the problem and falling in love with it.
Amazing book. Yuri came to Toronto, did a whole thing on it, and great to meet him. What a great thing at the time we are in now, especially for founders who are struggling to think about what they should be doing in AI. It's not about starting with the technology. It's about starting with the problem and then finding the perfect solution, something maybe a lot of people in crypto should have read before they jumped into crypto. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
I think this ties up the whole session that we had today, but life is about the journey, not the destination. Enjoy the moments, enjoy the people.
Absolutely. Fantastic talking with you and seeing you again. Thank you so much for joining us at the Tank today with Daniel Sachs, CEO and co-founder of LandBase.
Thanks, Matt. Great to see you.